I am Professor Lynn Porter from Fairfield University, and this is my lecture on style, abstraction, and the director's concept. I want to start us off with a quote, actually, from Tom Stoppard. Tom Stoppard is a very famous British playwright and screenwriter. Some of the plays he has written include Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, The Real Inspector Hound, and Arcadia. As a screenwriter, he's very famous for his script for Shakespeare in Love. He rewrote George Lucas's screenplay for one of the Star Wars films. And most recently, he wrote the script for Anna Karenina, the film with Keira Knightley and Jude Law. So that's Tom Stoppard. So, what does he have to say? Years and years ago, there was a production of The Tempest, out of doors, at an Oxford college on a lawn, which was the stage, and the lawn went back towards the lake on the grounds of the college, and the play began in natural light. But as it developed, and as it became time for Ariel to say his farewell to the world of The Tempest, the evening had started to close in, and there was some artificial lighting coming on. And as Ariel uttered his last speech, he turned and he ran across the grass and he got to the edge of the lake and he just kept running across the top of the water, the producer having thoughtfully provided a kind of walkway an inch beneath the water. And you could see and you could hear the plish splash as he ran away from you across the top of the lake until the gloom enveloped him and he disappeared from your view. And as he did so, from the further shore, a firework rocket was ignited, and it went whoosh into the air, and high up there it burst into lots of sparks, and all the sparks went out, and he had gone. When you look up the stage directions, it says, "Exit Ariel." So that's what Tom Stoppard said. It sounds like a pretty exciting way to exit a play, don't you think? But what does that have to do with directing? Well, the director is responsible for making all those decisions that make that exit Ariel moment come to pass. One of the biggest jobs a director has is interpreting the text for a production that's unique from any other production of that particular play script. And of course, everyone knows that the director works with actors, but the director also marshals the designers and the technicians and everyone else involved in the production with the overriding goal to create a unified and impactful performance. Unified in the sense that the style that the actors are using works with the scenery and the costumes and the lights and the sound, that everything seems to be of a piece. The director is the steward of the big picture for the entire production, making sure everything hangs well together and the performance has a strong impact on our audience. So what specifically does a director do? The director determines the play's major dramatic question, like what is this play really about? The director coaches the actors in their development of character. The director develops the blocking, which is the movement of the actors on stage. And once you start moving people around, you realize you have to watch the overall composition, which we call the stage picture. So as the stage picture changes and moves, the director oversees how all of that looks. And then the director determines the overriding style of the entire production, the style of the acting, the style of the scenery, the style of the lighting and the sound and the costumes, the overall style of the production. But I want to unpack the concept of style very specifically because it's a word that we use in everyday life, but it has a kind of mushy connotation. So I want to unpack it very specifically in terms of what we're talking about with theater. When we talk about dramatic style, we're talking about how we communicate our message and the manner of that expression. And these this is expressed through the language and the sound of a piece, through the visual look of a piece or the spectacle, and then the overarching movement. But I'm very much aware as I look at this text here on this slide, this doesn't really explain much, does it? I think we're going to have to look at some examples in order to really understand what I mean by style. And any discussion of style starts with the concept of realism. But what is real? What do we mean by real? I have this image here, a very famous painting by René Magritte from the early part of the 20th century. Isn't that a beautiful painting? But the text down at the bottom is part of the painting. For those of us who've studied French, or those of us who have Google Translate, we know this says, "This is not a pipe." What do you mean it's not a pipe? That looks like a pipe to me. This is not a pipe. It's clearly a pipe. But really, is it a pipe? Actually, no, it's not a pipe. It is a painting of a pipe. In terms of reality, it is oil paint on a canvas. And that's what Mr. Magritte was getting to when he made this odd and wonderful painting. There is an illusion of it being a pipe, but clearly it is not really, really a pipe. So we have a realistic painting of a pipe that is not the same thing as the pipe itself. And artists in all media, not just oil painters, wrestle with this concept of reality and realism all the time. So I want to introduce you to the style spectrum. So if we have art as this big old blue line here in the middle of the screen, at one far end of the line, we have what we call representational or realistic, things that appear and behave like they do in real life. But it's a work of art, so it's never real life. That painting of a pipe is not real life, but it can be a representational painting of a pipe. You can have a movie or a play that looks like the inside of a living room, and people are dressed in everyday clothes and they move and speak in a manner just like real life. So we do have representational art at one end of our art spectrum. But at the other end of our style spectrum, we have presentational art. We have a presentational style that deliberately departs from real life. And I want to point out that this is a spectrum. It is not either or. There are some pieces that float somewhere in the middle between representational and presentational. So let me say that again. Representational styles appear and behave like real life, while presentational style deliberately departs from real life in some way. So what do we mean by presentational or departing from real life? What we're really talking about is selectivity, the idea that we have selected pieces of reality and we've departed from them in some way. We may have some elements that are simplified or incomplete. We may have taken an element and we may have twisted it or manipulated it. We may have emphasized or de-emphasized something. We have or exaggerated or distorted something, or even reimagined what things look like. All art uses this selection process. An artist chooses what to represent, what to include in the piece, what to exclude from the piece, the media through which the piece will be presented, and then how that is all put together. Let's look at a few examples from visual art. How is representationalism or presentationalism being used in these art forms, in these works of art. So here we have a Leonardo da Vinci drawing, the Virgin and Child with Saint Anne and John the Baptist. What a beautiful drawing. The figures are rendered in some kind of realistic way. I can clearly tell that those are two women with two very small children sitting in a natural pose. The women's knees, one knee is higher than the other. The figure on the left is twisted in a way and is looking at the baby in her hands, while the other woman figure, the one more in the background, is turned toward her daughter Mary. So we have this very realistic rendition of human figures in very human poses. Well, it's realistic to a point. Check out the bottom of this drawing. Their feet, look at the women's feet. They're just barely indicated. They're not even really drawn. Obviously, that's not an important part of this drawing for our artist. So he has chosen what to render in a realistic form and what to leave in a very, very basic abstract form. And then also we just have the very simple abstraction of the fact that this is a drawing with a limited color palette, and it's gray and it's brown with a little bit of highlights, of very warm ochre colors, right? So while there are elements of realism or representationalism in this, it is not 100% to the left end of our style spectrum, is it? But here's the real question. What do you feel when you look at this drawing? What do you think of when you look at this drawing? Because that's really what the artist is going for. He's not trying to do a portrait of two women and children. No, he's trying to get a sense of that maternal Virgin Mary mother thing going on, as well as the adoration of this wonderful Jesus child. So our artist gives us this beautiful drawing of these two women and these two children, but he's also aiming at the idea of something for us to look up to, that we want to think of holiness. We want to think of the story of Mary and the Christ child. He wants us to think about the essential humanity of these characters, and he wants us to look up to them. So let's look at another famous work of art. This is Michelangelo's David. It seems like it's a very representational thing, isn't it? Clearly a strapping young man in excellent form. Is there anything presentational going on here? Well, now that you look at it, yes. Look at those curls. Look at the hair. Look at how the hair has been rendered. It's very, very stylized. Obviously, we can tell this is a man with curly hair, but I have never seen a person with curly hair in my life that looked like that. Have you? That is not realistic. Look at the features, the facial features. They're idealized. This is the perfect image of the classically perfect man. And check out those hands. I mean, they are huge relative to the size of the entire body. In fact, the entire head is large relative to the entire size of the body. And don't even get me going about color. This is a sculpture from marble. It's the color of marble. I've never seen a human being that color. Have you? Yikes. So our artist was selective what to include, how to render this idea of David. This is the David of David and Goliath story, and how to render him as this beautiful young man, but he also chose to stylize certain pieces of it. That is selectivity. Michelangelo was an amazing sculptor. He could have made incredibly realistic hair, but he chose not to. He chose not to. He could have made him look like some schmo you run into at the grocery store. No, he made him look like this idealized form of perfect manhood. Those are artistic choices. This is straying away from looking like real life. Let's move on to another piece. Here's a Renoir, a beautiful painting, Luncheon of the Boating Party. This is just a piece of the whole painting. Does this look like real life? Well, not really. I mean, I can tell there's three figures around a table. One guy looks like he's leaning back and smoking. A woman has her back to us. There's a guy on a river in the distance with a little rowboat. But this does not look real at all. In fact, there's an overall blurriness to it, you know? And in fact, this is an example of an impressionism where the painter wanted to give us an impression of the moment. The painter wanted us to feel like what it was like to be there without giving us every single detail of what it looks like there. Here's another famous painting, Van Gogh's Starry Night. We've all been outside at night. We've all looked up at the stars at night. Have you ever looked up at the stars and seen a sky that looks like this? Of course not. The artist is choosing how to render that sky. In fact, he doesn't care what the sky really looks like. He's trying to give a sense of what it feels like in that moment. These are the artistic choices. This is selectivity. Where would we put this painting on our style spectrum? Remember, all the way to the left is representational or real life. All the way to the right is presentational. Would we put this at either end of that scale? Would we put it somewhere in the middle? Compared to the Renoir we just looked at, isn't this more presentational than that one? Moving forward in time in this tiny little art history lesson, we have Picasso's first cubistic painting. I don't know French and I cannot even attempt to pronounce the title of this painting. Take a look at this. These are 5 women. Have you ever seen women who look like that? I think it's clear that Mr. Picasso was deliberately trying to not be realistic. He dehumanizes the subjects to the point of them looking more like masks and less like human people. But doesn't it ask us to think deeply about what we're seeing? What's going on here? Why am I seeing the side of the nose and the front of the eyes? What is my artist trying to say to me here? And for the purposes of this class, where would we place this painting on our style spectrum? Is it all the way down at realism on the left? Clearly not. Well, maybe it's much closer to the other end, the presentational end. I don't know. We'll see. Like I said, that is a spectrum. There's a continuum between representational and presentational. But with this painting, we are clearly somewhere in the middle, moving away from how things look in real life. And for those of you who think that Picasso was just really bad at drawing, that's not true at all. His early work as a young artist is beautifully representational. It looks like it was drawn by Leonardo da Vinci. But he moved into this style because he found he could be more expressive by being cubistic or expressionistic than by showing what things look like just on the outside. Think about it. If someone looks at you on the outside, will they know everything there is to know about you? Or is there something else going on about you as a person that's underneath the surface that doesn't show to the naked eye? That's what our artists are trying to get to by straying away from realism. So Mr. Picasso is probably pretty close to the presentational end of our style spectrum, right? Well, then there's Marcel Duchamp. This is his nude descending a staircase. And yes, it is an image of a nude woman walking down some stairs. What? Do you even see the image of the woman in here? Probably not. But do you have the sense of movement, that sense of descending movement from the upper left to the lower right? Absolutely. So here it's not even about the human figure, it's about the sense of movement. We have distorted the human figure past the point of even being able to recognize it, but definitely including a sense of a human body in motion. Where would we place this on our style spectrum? Is this more realistic than Picasso or less realistic? Probably less realistic, right? We can't even find the shape of a human figure in here. We could at least tell that was an image of 5 women in the previous painting. Here we can't even, many people look at this and can't find any human figure in it at all. So this Duchamp is probably at the far right end of our scale, is as presentational as we can go, right? Well, then there's Jackson Pollock. Oh, I love Jackson Pollock's paintings. Wow. He did these massive, massive paintings. This is the size of the wall in your room right now. I think it's safe to say that Mr. Pollock was not trying to do a painting that showed people or objects or things. He was trying to get rid of all of that surface stuff, what things look alike on the outside, and he was trying to get to the feelings underneath. He was definitely responding to the chaos he was finding in the world around him. So where would we put this painting on our style spectrum? Is it more realistic or less realistic than our Picasso, The Five Ladies? Well, clearly it's more abstract, less realistic. It's probably more abstract, less realistic than the Duchamp, the nude descending a staircase. Definitely more abstract than the Leonardo with the 2 beautiful women and the children, right? So this is a spectrum from very, very representational to very, very presentational. The artists are choosing, they're selecting what to include, what to exclude, and how to present their ideas. And when I say that, I mean Pollock is choosing to present his ideas on massive canvases with gobs, literally gobs of paint being thrown and squirted at the canvas with big turkey basters. Whereas Mr. Picasso was using a paintbrush to do his work. Whereas the Michelangelo David, he was choosing to present the ideas in marble with a hammer and a chisel and discovering this figure inside a big block of stone. So those are the artistic choices we're talking about here. The differences we are seeing are differences of style. One last work of art I want to share with you. This is a Mapplethorpe. Beautiful image of a beautiful black model. Where would we put this on our style spectrum? Look at this. It's a photograph. It's a real person. It's capturing what a human looks like in real life. But the artist is still making choices, choosing what we can see of this figure and what we can't see. He chose this pose that the model got into. He selected the angle of light. He selected the angle of the camera. He selected the fact that it's a black and white photograph of a black model. That selectivity still creates a powerful emotional response, even though this is much closer to the realistic or representational end of our spectrum. All art includes millions of selective choices that the artist makes. And as I've tried to show you in this little art history lesson, a huge piece of the choice-making process comes down to style, how representational or presentational or where on that spectrum am I going to place my work? So what does any of this have to do with theater? What does this have to do with directing? It has everything to do with interpretation. Our director takes the drama, takes the play script, and works to discover what the playwright is baking into that script, but then interpreting it so that those ideas can be communicated to an audience. And often it means that we're working at trying to create a meaning that is beyond a literal meaning. A director has to make sense of a text and the ideas that are in it while telling a good story in a way that excites emotion and gets us thinking and feeling and engaging deeply, gets us empathizing. So our director is choosing style as part of the overall interpretation of the piece. The director's interpretation is usually expressed in what we call the concept. And the concept, this is another messy term, so hang with me here. The concept is all of the ideas that go into communicating this overall unified interpretation for the audience. And different concepts can create very different productions without changing a word of dialogue. It's really important to understand we're not rewriting the play here. We are simply figuring out stylistically, conceptually, how we can present it. The director is the one who comes up with the overarching concept, sometimes just independently, and sometimes in conversations with the designers. So think about it. If you're doing a production of Hamlet where everybody in the play is lying, oh my God, it's this web of lies surrounding Hamlet. You could use the idea of a web. You could use the idea of a spider web, and that could become a unifying visual concept that's part of the scenery, part of the part of the costumes. Even the way that the actors move could be part of this concept of a web in this overarching concept for a production of Hamlet. Or you could look at Hamlet and you could say this is a detective story. Hamlet is trying to find the truth amongst all of these lies in this world of this play. So maybe you would borrow some imagery from film noir, those wonderful black and white films of the 40s that Humphrey Bogart did that were so evocative of everything having to do with a detective story. The overarching concept is how that idea is expressed to the audience. But it's also important to understand that you cannot just randomly impose a concept onto a play. It's an idea that has to grow from the text itself, from deep analysis of the text, just as we've been doing in terms of structure and genre in this class. All of the work that we are doing in this class is the exact same work that a director has to do in understanding the play and starting to develop a concept. Sometimes the director expresses a concept in the form of a metaphor. Now, we all know that a metaphor is a linguistic tool to connect two disparate ideas. Love is war, or I'm so thirsty I could drink like a camel. Actually, that's a simile, not a metaphor, right? But it's a way of connecting thirsty and camel, or love and war. And somehow, by connecting those two ideas together linguistically, we open up these wonderful poetic connections within our audience's minds. So that's a linguistic metaphor where you take out the like or as of a simile and just say he is a camel, and somehow that says something about his thirst. And so we take this idea of a metaphor that we all learned in English class, and now we're talking about it in a visual sense. So we're talking about some kind of visual, sometimes oral, mostly visual, touchstone that represents everything about the play in the director's mind. The play is something or other. And then that allows for the interpretation of the text, but by creating these limits that help keep everyone on the same page. So, you know, I was just talking about Hamlet, in using the imagery of a spider web. Um, and that could indeed end up being expressed in a metaphor that the world of the play Hamlet is a web. And by having that, this play is a web metaphor, that then becomes a touchstone for everybody who's working on the show and how they choose to express the acting, the set design, the costume design, the lighting, the sound, everything fits within that world. So it's a way to limit the choices, but then allows for a unified overall production, which is, of course, the director's main goal. But since one of the director's main tasks is to choose the overriding style of a production, I want to make sure we're up to date on these terms. So, representationalism is a production style that attempts to create real life on stage, that everything we see, the acting, the way the dialogue is written, the way the actors move, the way the designs look like what real life looks like, that all falls within the realm of representationalism. In this kind of a production, the audience is a fly on the wall, and the actors or the characters don't acknowledge us, that they don't talk directly to us. The actors pretend that there is a wall separating the performers from the audience. This is called theater of the fourth wall, with the idea of, let's say we're looking into somebody's living room. Living room has four walls, but if we've lifted out one wall so the audience can peer into this living room, everyone pretends that wall is still there. The audience pretends that wall is there, and the actors pretend that wall is there, and everything is turned toward what's happening on stage. That is what we call representationalism or realism. It looks like real life. And then the other end of our style spectrum is presentationalism. And this is a production style that blatantly acknowledges that what we're experiencing is fake. It is a style where we're purposely not trying to depict real life. And there may be some serious, distorted, or abstracted things going on. Just like in all of those images of the visual art that I showed you, by the time you got to Mr. Jackson Pollock at the end, where there's literally blobs of thrown paint, he's clearly not trying to depict what anything looks like. He's trying to get to what something feels like. The same thing happens in the theater with the presentational style. Now, you may be thinking, that sounds weird. I've never seen a play like that. I don't think I would understand a play that's abstracted in this way. Oh, but wait, you have experienced this. For example, when you see a musical and a character bursts into song or people come on stage and dance, that doesn't happen in real life. Yes, we sing in everyday life, we occasionally dance a little bit, but not like they do in a musical. No. In fact, something very special is going on in those moments in a musical, something so special that the characters can't talk about it. They have to actually elevate themselves to the level of song. The same thing with poetry. When a character speaks in poetry, it's a heightened language. It's not like real life. So we have all experienced this kind of presentational style. Sometimes on stage we have dream sequences or sequences from the perspective of someone who's not in their right mind. and all kinds of bizarre and wonderful things can happen on stage, like they happen in our dreams. That is absolutely in the realm of presentationalism. And opposite to the theater of the fourth wall I was just talking about, sometimes actors break character and talk to us, where they talk to us as actors, not as their characters. Or sometimes the characters look us in the eye, they catch our eye as audience members, and they talk directly to us. And we're very much aware that I'm engaged now in this conversation with this person who's on stage. So there's ways to purposely break that fourth wall. That is very presentational too. And then, of course, music and non-realistic sound effects can underscore what's happening in a play, sometimes to enhance the mood or sometimes to break the illusion that this is a real experience. These are just some simple examples of presentationalism in the theater. There's infinite number of ways to move away from a realistic style. But think about it. Most of us love musicals. And the thing we love about it is the fact that there's that beautiful music and these people stop their normal lives and they just sing for a while. And isn't that amazing? It's so uplifting and marvelous. And most of us can't even put our finger on why musicals are so entrancing. But they do it with this presentational style. The fact of the music is the fact that elevates those pieces. So while you may be thinking, I don't think I would understand anything if it's not realistic, actually, yes, you have understood a lot if you've engaged with musicals. And of course, there's always the people who don't like musicals. And the people who don't like musicals actually hate them. And you ask them what they hate about them, and they will say, I don't know. It's all that weird singing. People don't normally do that. So some people just refuse to go along for the ride with presentationalism. But most people love musicals for exactly that same reason. So sometimes theater artists intentionally choose to go with a presentational style. And why would we do that? Sometimes the truth is better told through metaphor than simply telling it flat out. Sometimes what's happening in real life is too something, too small, or too big, or too awful, or too personal to get across in a way that is effective. Sometimes we choose presentationalism because we just want to pay attention to something that's different and surprising. And we know that when we do presentationalism right, there is a subconscious gut level response that an audience member has to the style. In fact, I have some examples I want to show you with how this style can work using film. Sometimes these ideas are easier to understand when we look at examples than when I just blather on about them. Okay, this is weird because now you're viewing this lecture as a video in YouTube, but I've embedded some YouTube links into the video and I'm also putting them below in the comment section. So as I work through this, I want you to stop, go to these other links and watch the film clips. Each one of these clips looks at the same idea, the first days of a lion cub in life, but they're presented in different stylistic fashions. So please leave this lecture now, go to the video Born Wild, The First Days of Life with Lion Cubs. It's a documentary in the Nature PBS series. Okay, now that you have seen that wonderful film clip, where on our style spectrum would you place that clip? Is it representational, looking like real life? Is it presentational, deliberately departing from real life? Or is it somewhere in the middle? Well, let's see. It's a documentary. There were They were literally photographing real animals in the wild, documenting real animal behavior, right? So even though this was a film that was obviously shot by humans, obviously trying to tell a story, obviously edited, we know all of that happened. The film clip we just saw is probably pretty close to the representational end of our spectrum, pretty close to the end over there on the left-hand side, right? Or do you disagree? And here's another question to think about. What was your reaction to that piece as an audience member? Did you emotionally connect to the world of those animals? Did you feel empathetic toward them? What did you think about and feel about while you were watching that piece? Did you connect at all? Did the style of the piece affect how you connected? Okay, here is another link to another film clip I want you to watch. So please leave this lecture and go watch this next video clip. So there you have it, a very similar theme to our first film clip, wasn't it? The introduction of the baby lion to the father character and then to the rest of the world. Of course, the opening sequence from the wonderful film The Lion King. We've all seen it. We've all seen it multiple times. How marvelous is that film, right? Okay. So, similar themes as what we had in our first film clip, but a radically different style. And these animals, look at the way they're acting. They're acting more like people than they are acting like animals, aren't they? They are certainly more human in their character traits than the animals we saw in our documentary clip. Think about it. Would a male lion give the baby lion to a baboon? Would the baboon and the lion even be friends? Probably not. I think the lion would be eating the baboon and that they would be in this predator-prey situation. This is a very human relationship be between Mufasa and Rafiki that we see in this film, isn't it? It's not at all realistic in terms of how they're interacting. So where would we place that clip from The Lion King on our style spectrum? Is it all the way at the representational end because it looked just like real life? Is it all the way on the other end, on the right end, with the presentational where it departs from real life? Where on this spectrum would we place this film? Is it as realistic as the documentary clip that we saw? No, relative to one another, the documentary is closer to the representational end of our spectrum. Okay. So even though in the Lion King clip that we just saw, we can clearly tell that that is a male lion, that is a female lion, that is a baby lion. I guess they're called cubs, right? That is a baboon. That is a bird. We can recognize all of those animals, and they're drawn beautifully. We know they are drawn by humans, but they're a little abstracted, aren't they? They don't look exactly like the lions we saw in the first clip. They're kind of idealized, aren't they? So this is a animated film. The fact that it's been animated and not photographed is another form of abstraction. It doesn't look like real life. It was never intended to look like real life, was it? So stylistically, it is more presentational than the documentary clip that we just saw. But now the big question, as an audience member, what was your reaction to watching that sequence? What did you feel? What did you think? What did you think about as you were watching that clip? Was it the exact same response you had to the documentary that we saw? Or was it different? How do you think the style affected your experience? Okay, so now I want you to go somewhere else in YouTube and view a third video clip. So there you had exactly the same sequence we saw in the Lion King clip, in the first Lion King clip, but now we're seeing it as performed on the stage. It's exactly the same, right? No, of course, it's very different. Of course, there are very similar things, the rising sun, the sound of the music, the various animals, but now we're seeing things in a very different way. These ideas are being presented in a different way. This is a question of style. And there's a lot more going on here in this version of this story, isn't there? The designers made a very clear attempt to make us aware of the humans inside these animals. We can see that Rafiki is an African American woman. We can see the humans, despite the fact they are clearly lions. We can see the humans who are in the rhino. Uh, there's so much that is very human about this version, isn't it? And just so we can look close up, these are some shots of the original actors, the original Mufasa, and the original Scar in the original costumes. Okay, so taking a look at what's going on here, we can clearly see up over top of the actors' heads, we can see these huge headdresses, these masks that look very much like the characters as we see them in the animated film, right? We can clearly see that that's Mufasa's face or that's Scar's face. But then look down, we can also see, wow, we can see the actor's face. So the actor can be expressive with his own face, but also be projecting the majesty of this adult male lion that he is portraying. But from the shoulders down, what's going on here? Let's look at Mufasa. Does he look like he's wearing a lion suit? Does he look like the lion in The Wizard of Oz with basically furry pajamas? Not at all. In fact, it looks like they took these images from native African cultures and combined them. Oh my God, look, he's carrying swords. He looks like a warrior lion, doesn't he? He has that big plate around his shoulders that makes his shoulders look really wide and very much like armor. It's around his chest, it looks like some kind of armor, right? Isn't that interesting? And then we get down to the legs, and the fabric is specifically made to look like kente cloth, that beautiful African cloth, but it also is somehow echoing the shape of a lion's legs. Same thing, if we look over at Scar, we see a very similar thing happening. But there's something about this guy that he's just spiky. Everything about this guy is spiky. And we certainly understand that about this character. He's the lion to be afraid of. The lion who's a little maybe a little broken, a little deformed. Definitely the scary lion. Where would we put these costumes on our style spectrum? Here we see the original costume for Rafiki and the original costume for young Simba. Again, emphasizing the human figure. In fact, the young Simba character is always cast as a virile young man, and we see his chest, we see his naked arms, we see his bare legs. That is very much emphasized. So the human in the lion is emphasized in this stage production. And then let's talk about some abstraction. Here we have Zazu, that wonderful bird that is the advisor to the king, right? And now we're talking about a puppet, beautiful puppet that looks very much like the bird that we know from the animated film, doesn't it? But he's small. In order to get the scale right and in order to make him the right size and to have him on stage, we have to incorporate the puppeteer into the overall design. So there's Zazu sitting on the top of the bowler hat, But look from the hat down. Look at our puppeteer's costume. Wow. Okay, it's very much a human tail suit, if you will, a tail coat with pants and trousers. But around the neck, look at that wonderful, uh, what would you call that? A ruff? Would you call that some kind of a collar that echoes some of the textures and the shapes from the bird itself? In fact, the tails of the tailcoat, they're red on the inside, just like the bird's tail is, and then has the red feet, the long, funny feet. So there's elements of the design of the costume for the puppeteer that also echo elements of Zazu the bird. So the bird Zazu is a combination of this puppet and puppeteer. Talk about abstraction. We literally see the human operator on stage. In the film clip you just saw, he was the one who ran down the aisle of the audience and then was flying the bird overhead. Because in this production, the bird takes several forms. In that film clip, we saw the flying form. In these still clips, we see the the more uh, the more expressive puppet form. So where do we place the stage version of The Lion King on our style spectrum? Is it on the representational end? Does that look like real life? Probably not. I don't know what planet you live on. I don't know any people or creatures that look like what we just saw in that Lion King for the stage clip. So where is it on the style spectrum? Maybe it's more presentational, where they're deliberately departing from real life while also consciously mixing their visual metaphors. We are taking all of the visual imagery from the wonderful animated Lion King film, and we're overlapping it with beautiful African native imagery, aren't we? So, what is the effect for you? What is your reaction as an audience member? What did you feel when you were watching this clip? What did you think about when you were watching the clip? Was it the same as when you were watching that documentary of the lions in the Serengeti? Probably not, was it? So, stylistic changes can affect audience experience. Did you have exactly the same experience in this version of The Lion King that you did in watching the animated film clip? Probably not. What was the difference for you specifically? What was the difference? Now, before I leave this lecture, I'm going to ask you to go to a fourth video clip that I have found. And I'm sure you all know what it is. Maybe is it a Lion King Circle of Life video clip? Yes, I actually just found one on YouTube long after I had finished the video portion of this. So I'm going to ask you to go to the fourth video clip in the notes underneath this lecture and watch that Lion King Circle of Life clip. And then I'm going to ask you the same questions again about where that film version, the most recent film version that came out in 2019, where that film of The Lion King sits on our style spectrum. And more importantly, following viewing that 2019 video clip, how does it make you feel? What do you think about as you watch that sequence? What is your reaction? How does the style affect you as an audience member? I'm not asking you to choose your favorite version. I'm asking you to learn to tease apart your experience based on the style itself. So, to wrap all of this up, the director's job is to oversee the entire production and make sure that it is a unified experience. That what the actors do, what the designers do, what the overall look and feel of the production, that all of it comes from a unified place. In the theater, we talk a lot about the world of the play. We create the world for each individual production. And so how that world looks, how that world reacts, how that world is what we're talking about here. So I'm hoping that you're understanding that this is a matter of interpretation. We just saw several video clips from The Lion King. The sound was almost the same, but the style was different, wasn't it? So there's a stylistic choice, and I'm hope by seeing those various clips, you're able to see that difference in style can have a different impact on the audience. And the director is the primary person who chooses the overriding style of a production. Often that is appears through the concept and metaphor. And the whole idea of abstraction is about selectivity. We're selecting what to include, what to exclude, how to express our ideas. That is what abstraction's about. That is what selectivity is about. So there's a lot of complex terms that I hope that are clearer to you now after listening to this lecture. Thank you so much for your attention.